So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Mary Abukutsa. She is a professor at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, and she is the progenitor of all the research you currently see now on African indigenous vegetables, or AIVs. Her research has led to innovations in food security and nutrition security, as well as poverty reduction in Africa. She is both an advocate for inclusion and open science around the world, as well as someone who can show that line from research directly to policy impact in a way that's very powerful. So that's enough for me. It's my delight to turn it over to you, Professor Abukutsa. Thank you so much for joining us. It is an honor.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction. I welcome you all to share. I want to share my journey on research, and it's a pleasure to be able to interact with you. So in the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to tell you a journey of many years, over 30 years. So it's not very easy for me, but I'll try to condense what I leave out. You can ask in the Q&A session. So as you can see, that is the title that we have settled on, just to give you a story of my research journey. Next, please. So this picture is when I was 10 years old in Kenya, rural Kenya, and I had an issue with allergy with animal protein. So my late mother used to feed me on African leafy vegetables. As I grew older at that age, I started thinking of what do I do to make a difference. And it just occurred to me that I must do something to save African leafy vegetables because they were disappearing. They were not in the mainstream agricultural practices, and they were not there in the market. So I said, how do I make a difference? I said, then let me study agriculture and focus on vegetables. And that was sealed in my heart. I didn't tell anybody. Of course, many people did not support my choice of agriculture, but that was my childhood dream then. And that's how my journey actually started. So I had a passion to study these African leafy vegetables that my mother fed me, collect them from the wild. Next, please. So from that time I was 10 years old, now in this picture, I want to share with you a story that after many years of research, after doing a degree in agriculture, agronomy, and also horticulture, there was a time I had to talk about my work to the public. And this is my first public lecture, which was the second JKU. JKU is my university inaugural lecture. That was in 2010. So we had a long journey, but the journey continues up to today. So this inaugural lecture was looking at my work on African indigenous vegetables, just talking to the public and everybody who cared to listen, where we have come from and where we are going. This publication is online and you can access it. If you just key in my name and inaugural lecture, JKU, you will get the soft copy of that inaugural lecture. Next, please. So moving from 10-year-old to the time I gave the inaugural lecture, the journey continued. But the focus of my research, I understand that you are not in this area, but I'll try to be as simple as I can. My focus was African indigenous vegetables research. Why did I choose that? Because one, as I said, it is a vegetable or a crop that saved my life because of my allergy. Two, I also realized that it was very nutritious and they had a lot of advantages in terms of production, and it could play a part in food security, nutrition, and well-being of my community. So I initiated this research as a multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, participatory, and collaborative research. At that time, I just wanted to work with anybody who cared to listen on African indigenous vegetables because it was an area that was neglected and many people didn't consider it very important. So among all the collaborators, The World Vegetable Center was a key partner because they were also focusing in that area. But as I went through my research from the 10-year to the inaugural lecture up to today, I met some major challenges that we'll walk through, that go through my talk today. But I want to highlight at this early stage, the main attitude, whether it was coming from the global south or global north, were the negative attitudes. And these attitudes, I could categorize them into two groups. One, the negative attitude was the crop. Being an African indigenous crop, it didn't augur well with many partners, especially from the global north, because there were some specific crops that they were considered superior to the African indigenous ones. So that was the first challenge I met throughout the trajectory. Then there was the biases in terms of my geographical origin. Many times I would be told this work is not good enough because it was done in a laboratory we can't trust, as I will show you as we go along, and I'll show you how. I'll give you specific examples and how I handled them. So my focus was to strategically reposition African indigenous vegetables in the horticulture sector so that it can play a part in contributing to food security, nutrition, and well-being of the African people and beyond. So I initiated two programs. JKU, what is the abbreviation of my current university? I initiated a program on African indigenous vegetables in 1991. And in 1996, I initiated another program, the similar program, in a university in Western Kenya near Lake Victoria called Maseno University on African indigenous vegetables. And these two universities where I've worked, and that's how I have actually highlighted them. Next, please. So the trajectory of my work, these are how I handled it. So I had to look for collaborators and stakeholders. I had to write proposal and look for funding. I had to implement the research, and I had to come up with some outputs, capacity build, to do publications, dissemination and communication, advocacy and promotion. And then I will let you know what the future plans, because I think I have not finished my business on this research. So I'll highlight, and as I tell you my story, I will be indicating where I encountered some of the biases and negative attitudes, especially when I tried to write proposals and up to the time I was trying to publish. So this is how I'll walk you through briefly. Next, please. So instead of in terms of collaborators and stakeholders, I did organize way back, I think it's in early 2000s, around 2000 or late 1900s, 1990s, I held a stakeholders workshop because in my mind, I had this, what now you call inclusion. I wanted everybody to be involved in this problem because I'd realized that people are not interested and neglecting African indigenous vegetables among other crops. So I wanted anybody who cared to listen to come and contribute. So I held a stakeholders workshop. I think it was the year 2000. And then I formed what I called African Indigenous Vegetable Working Group. And all were welcome, whether you are a farmer, whether you are a professor, whether you are an administrator, anybody that has information and interest. So that formed my first focus in terms of making it inclusive. It was an informal group, yes, but anybody who cared to listen came. And then all players in the value chain were welcome. As I said, from people who are traders up to the consumers, restaurants, owners, and those who have eating places, and consumers were welcome. So I approached different partners, but there are many partners I worked with, over 100. I cannot mention all of them, but I want at this point to mention in 2000, I identified what we call AVRDC. Now it's called World Veg Center, World Vegetable Center. We had an Arusha African Center, and they were focusing on African indigenous vegetables. And that's how now this strengthened my research. In Kenya, we got partners in Kenya, in Africa, and even beyond. But most of the partners were from the African continent. Later, a few others joined in from the global north. We had universities, research institutions, non-governmental organizations, restaurants, hospitals, as I said, and schools, both primary and secondary schools. Next, please. So here we are. Writing research proposals was a key for any researcher, because before you publish, you have to write a proposal that's fundable, you implement. So at this point, many of my groups were not very familiar with writing proposals, so we had to do capacity building in proposal writing. We formed various multi and transdisciplinary groups to respond to some calls that were available. And all the proposals we wrote in different groups, only 50% of the written proposals were funded. Some were due to maybe lack of funds, adequate funds. Some reasons were because of focus of the research funding organization. And one of the things that I would like to say at this point is that when we're writing proposals, some of the specific funding organizations, some of them just looked at African indigenous vegetables. Even before they read the proposal, they say this is not food and this is weeds. So we would lose many of the funding opportunities just by that bias, by especially the funding bodies from the global north. So we've got a lot of our proposals disqualified because we were talking about, first of all, because it was talking about indigenous vegetables. According to the global north understanding, those were weeds and they were not important economically. Next, please. So this is just for you to see, maybe you can look at it later. We wrote several, see, I'm just showing some of the proposals that were funded. And I said, there are many that went down the drain for various reasons. So this is the first 7. Next, please. I don't have to read them, all of them. Next, please. Just go back, please, Sarah. Yeah, so this is up to 18 proposals. I think they're about 20, but I chose the main ones, 20 proposals over time that got funding through hook and crook. Of course, some of you who may have written proposals, it's not a walk in the park to write a proposal. So all that was putting in a lot of effort. And as I said, there were some rejections. And in a moment, I'll give you some more examples of how some of the proposals we wrote were rejected. Next, please, Sarah. Thank you. So I've just highlighted a few examples. There are many examples, but because of time, I've just put what I would consider several gatekeeping experience I had in just writing research proposals. So first of all, they'll look at the topic. Development partner from Global North dismissed my proposal. The proposal was on one of the indigenous vegetables called spider plant. I was going to look at the agronomic, how to grow it and how nutritious it is. So the answer was, we are not going to fund your proposal, not because it is not quality proposal, but the crop you are working on is considered a weed in their understanding. So that proposal was not funded at that time. But what did I do? I did not give up. So I did some preliminary work using just my own funds and came up with nutritional content of all the major vegetables in Kenya and sent them. After 8 years later, actually they funded me. So I never gave up. So I told them, these are not weeds, these are vegetables. They have been eaten by Africans and there is no research done. And they are going to contribute to food security in Kenya and in Africa. So that's one of the experiences I had. They were very explicit that we are not funding you not because the proposal is poor, but it is a crop that we think is a weed. But later, the same funding body were funded the same research on African indigenous vegetables. Now, my PhD proposal, I was to do it in a university in the global north. So when they asked me to write my proposal, give my concept note, of course, I wanted to work on African indigenous vegetables. So I wrote my proposal very nicely and sent it in advance before I went to that university. So they wrote back and said, we cannot have this. The crop I wanted to work on was slender leaf, which is one of the African indigenous nutritious vegetable. But they had to say, I had to choose among of what they had in mind. So I had to choose onion reluctantly, but I just said, let me get the knowledge, let me get my PhD, then when I go back, then I will be able to work on more indigenous vegetables. And that's why when I came back from doing my PhD, I focused on African indigenous vegetables working group. So the other, in writing proposals, the other experience I have with a partner from the global north is a most recent one. This just happened, I think, in 2018, because of my work I had done over time, I had actually been able to come up with some results showing that African indigenous vegetables are very nutritious and they have a part to play. So one of the partners from the global north approached me. We wrote a proposal together, and he was the main person, but I was just one partner from Kenya. But what happened was very unfortunate that this particular partner got the money from USAID and disappeared with the money and took the proposal, took the budget, they took the project to another African country, leaving me out because in my understanding was that he wanted now to create his own portfolio, excluding me because already I had advanced knowledge about these vegetables. Of course, I showed my displeasure, and later he came and apologized, but that was something that it really affected my progress, but I never gave up because I thought that being this work I've been doing, instead of working with me, he wants to exclude me and go and do it in another country. So that was a very painful experience for me. But as I said, I think I'll use what we call turn your challenges into opportunities. So every time there's a challenge, I'll turn it into an opportunity. Next, Sarah. So let's come to implementation of the research. So I want to also emphasize that through the implementation, I actually followed this inclusive approach to research. I want just to mention one of the research I did, which was funded by, I think, Sida Sarek, one of the global north, but supported. So the experience I had there was that I brought in somebody. I was an agricultural scientist, but I brought in somebody from literature. And this person actually was making poems and songs about the goodness of African indigenous vegetables. And I think this was a good thing, just a positive thing in this implementation, because most of the funding bodies were emphasizing multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary the research and participatory. But many of the scientists were not able to embrace that, but I found it very easy to embrace it. It was a learning pad for me, but it was a good thing that when we look at a problem, we don't have to look at one side, we have to look at it globally and in a holistic way. So in this particular implementation, I worked with fellow researchers, I worked with undergraduate and postgraduate students, I worked with national and international organizations, and these ones I've listed there. But the most important thing I want to talk about here in this particular implementation was the inclusion of media, because in my head, I wanted to make sure anything I do is open. I mean, that time there was no word like open access, but to me, I wanted just to share anything I know about indigenous vegetables with anybody who wanted to listen and learn from it. So I actually got involved in media. I even went for media training, how to work with media. And from that time in 2008 onwards, I decided to be including a media person in my research so that whatever we do is spoken of and related to the wider public so they can see what we are doing and how they can use it. Then we had farmers, of course, limited. We would get some indigenous knowledge of what they are doing, and they will use that, get the challenges, and then use that to define our problem that we'll solve. But I want to talk about the last one is an experience I had when I was implementing research in the university in Maseno. One of the, I think a staff who was from the global north, but I was a staff in the university. I was giving a presentation on African indigenous vegetables, and he dressed me down and said, all those things we are talking about are poisonous plants. They can never be vegetables. I had to show him the work I had done, the nutrient content, and the content of other anti-nutrients of those vegetables. And I told him that if these plants were poisonous, all Africans would be dead by now. So that's another experience I had where I was feeling suppressed in my area of research of African indigenous vegetables from the global north players, maybe out of ignorance or trying to close what I was trying to bring into the light. Next, please. So from 1991 up to now, or up to now, several research projects have been done collaboratively with other people. But I want to say here that there has been some kind of tangible outputs, many of them, but here I want to talk about outputs that were good to the farmers, end users, because many of us researchers focus more publishing in high impact farmers, high impact journals, I mean. But then my take was that I need to do something apart from publishing. I must also communicate this information to the end users, those who will have a real impact in my understanding, in changing lives, in policy. So here we see, we did research, we looked at some of the outputs who are here. We moved these vegetables from being poor man's crop to being a commercial crop as we speak now. So you can see all this was because of being open access, open science, and involving other partners. So this is just a summary of some of the things, of the fruits that we have seen in this research because of being open, being inclusive, and also not leaving out somebody who cared to hear and use the information that we came out, the technologies, so to speak. Next. Yeah, just press it, okay.
Sorry, Mary, I'm trying to take notes. I'm taking notes while you go there, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So what I am showing here is that after we do the research, we need to communicate. We need to publish. So I want just to give an example of what I went through. So scientific papers was the first publication that I needed to do. So we had then, I don't know how old some of you are, traditional print journal papers, long time ago. And it used to take a long time. You write a paper, you send it maybe by post, it goes, takes maybe 3 months, it comes back, and then with red marks, and then you have to correct it, send back, and it will take almost a whole year to publish a paper. So that's what I went through. Then we had these international journals, so to speak, international high impact journals. I also attempted to send my work there. Most of it was rejected. I'll give you specific examples in a moment. which I can categorize as bias rejection. So bias rejection, if I may just mention, was that when I did my master's degree, I did my work in Kenya, in Nairobi University, and the work I did, I published it. I sent it to a journal in Europe, and they wrote back to me and said, this work, we can't publish it because we do not trust the lab where you did the work. So what did I do? I just looked for another African journal, Discovery and Innovation, which was being run by African Academy of Sciences. So I published a paper there. What surprised me was the response from the readers, even from the global north, even after being rejected by the publishers. When I published in the African journal, there was overwhelming response in terms of asking about what I was looking at some content, some biochemical content of a vegetable that's common in Kenya, African kale, or kale, which is commonly eaten in Kenya. So that just showed me that it's not that my paper was substandard, it's just they didn't want to publish because it was done in a lab in Global South. I may be wrong, but that was my conclusion. So, and then I started now trying to, as we went on, there was now open access journals were being introduced. So I got so into these open access journals. When I now had experienced the long-term print journals and then the international journals that are biased, then there was this issue of open access journals, and I was very interested. So the open access journals, I tried to search through the DOAJ platform to see which ones are the open access journals. And what made a difference to me is African Journal of Food, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Development. I think this was one of the first African journals to go open access. I happen to have been a reviewer for them. So I quickly got interested in what this open access is all about. Next, please. So this concept of open access publishing was actually introduced to me formally in 2010. The journal I've just talked about, the AIP Fund, where I was a reviewer, they invited me to a workshop in the University of Nairobi, where there was IFIL and the consortium of Kenyan University Libraries. IFIL is, I think, a promoter of open access. So during that time, I got to know what really this open access is. That was 2010. And I never looked back. I embraced whatever, because I wanted a journal which, when I publish, everybody can access what I'm writing. And when I'm writing, I'm not having my paper to be left out because of bias, but for genuine reasons. So I was very, 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 very encouraged, and I was very happy to take part in this original open access workshop in Kenya. Next, please. So having done that 2010, as I said, I never looked back. So I will, without going into many details, I became an advocate for open research, open access. And I felt that organization which was promoting open access used me to be like an ambassador. So from that time, I went to every university that was supposed to start institutional repositories, because that's what they were proposing in institutions. So that just shows how the trajectory has come. That is, from what I understood from the first workshop, I just wanted, I was very excited about it, and I wanted everybody to embrace it. But professors were not very, very happy. They didn't want to embrace it, but for me, it was, I think the sky was the limit. So that just shows some of the areas, the slide shows some of the areas or places I've gone within Kenya and even outside Kenya. Next, please. So you can see I was in Nairobi, I was even in other countries. I think I was in Uganda and so on. There was even a time we did Santa Clara, a USU university, asked me to talk about open access, just the way I'm talking to you. And I talked my experience, just the way I'm talking to you now. And I think that from there, that's when we went to Cape Town and I met Sarah. And here again, because all this, even Cape Town conference, I was invited because of what I stand for in terms of open access, because of what I have seen, what I've learned over from 2010 and how I've used it, like I've seen there, like I'll show in a moment, why I feel it is very useful and it's very important to have open access journals that are accessible and the information there is accessible to all as much as possible. Next, please. So out of that, I told you that I had the hard print copies, then I had these international high impact journals, then I had the African journals and other journals. So out of this, I want just to show you some of the publications I have done. I call them all publications, not in the strict sense of the word in terms of the academic publications, but I call them publications and communications, because in my understanding, any research that's done must be communicated one way, either in a scientific paper or in any other way. So I have put there public lectures and keynote speeches, which also speak on the research I've done, their thesis, and all those categories are there. And from that list, I have about 251 publications and communications, which are out there. If you go to the internet and key in my name, key African indigenous vegetables, you'll find all these things there. You'll find documentaries. So that's why I'm saying that publication or open science, open research is not just about publishing in the journals, which is okay, but it must be published in open access journals that people can access the information. And secondly, there must be other communications for other clientele, people who are not researchers, people who want the information to use it to make impact, people who are policymakers, people who are the practitioners. In my case, the farmers, they need this information to make a difference as they produce food for their families and for other people in the community. So this is what I had, and you can see I tried my best. I tried my best to make sure that most of what I have is open access. For example, if you look at the thesis number 2, where I did my university, now they created institutional repository. So my thesis, which was a hard copy, they had to translate it, photocopy it, and make it now accessible in soft copy. So you can see that efforts have been made to make sure that the work that has been done is lying on shelves is actually out there. Next, please. So why I'm sharing this is that you can see my work. I started in 1991, long time ago. But you can see, if you look at Google Scholar, my work only started being seen when I started embracing open access publishing. So I told you around 2007, that's when I now started publishing with the African Journal, the one I talked about, the first African journal that I knew was publishing online. And as I went on publishing with open access, my work has become more accessible. It's just up to 2022. I don't know how it is now, but you can see the trajectory. That means that this work, which is published online, open access, and it is being accessed by those who need it, not being hidden in certain journals that are restrictive, that are not able people are not able to access the publication or the information there, which could be useful in solving some of the existing challenges in the world. Next, Sarah. The other thing I did, they say charity starts at home. At my own institution, JKUAT is Jomo, Kenyatta University. It's a long name, but JKUAT is my university where I am. So I also worked with the library to have what we are calling open, not open, JKUAT digital repository policy. And this came up way back in 2012, we had we had the workshop in 2010, and then by 2012, working with the other partners, we ensured that with my participation and encouragement and mentoring my fellow researchers in the university, that we had that policy, and most of the professors and most of the researchers were encouraged to have their publications in this repository. And I think my story was that if you put it there, your work will become known. You'll become, these days, people will know what you are working on and so on. So this is what I did also to ensure that within my university, they are embracing open access by putting the digital repository policy in, so that it can guide the researchers and the academic staff as they publish their work. Next, please. This, I think I can't say much. It's just talking about the details. We had several workshops, and then we convinced we called the vice chancellor to buy into it and gave a policy. And then up to now, this has helped Jomo Kenyatta University, my university, to be well positioned, because this is part of the criteria that makes a university ranking. Though we are silver, but at least it played a part to help the university be ranked better within the country and even within the Africa and globally. Next, please. So here I'm just showing some of the things that they have in that repository, different speeches, different journals, different news, and so on. So if you go there, for example, I have given my papers. You'll find some of my papers there. If you go to the institutional repository, my work's there. The aim is to be more accessible and also to reposition the university, to reposition my work, and even to reposition me as a researcher, that I'm known, my work is known all over the world, not just in Kenya alone. Next, please. Yeah, this just, okay.
Oh, sorry,
so
let me go back.
Just go back, yes, please, thank you. I was just saying that this is some of the things that are in the repository. Most of the time, postgraduate students, masters and PhD, when they do their thesis, one of the requirements, they must submit a soft copy of the thesis, so it's in that repository. So you can be able to access most of those things that are being done. So if you want to search, you can go to the JQuad repository, search in my name, you will find some of my publications there, not all, but because of the copyright issues, but they're there. Next, please. So let me now specifically give you some examples. I say there are many examples, but I only pick a few in the interest of time. Publication communications. Some of the gatekeeping experiences I had personally was that, without mentioning the name, because I don't think it's fair to mention the name, international high impact journal from the global north. One, they rejected my paper, biased rejection in my opinion. I may be wrong, but these are my reasoning. As I said earlier, the reasoning was the laboratory you used was not trusted. But eventually I published it in African Journal. I think I'd mentioned earlier. The paper drew global attention. So my thinking is that now, if this African journal didn't publish, so my work would have just been, would not have been heard or had not been used, because it was a very pioneering work. Actually, I was looking at the content of chemicals called thiocyanates and nitrates, which were, I think, very little work had been done on it, so like pioneering work. So you can see that was a bias which I put in my pocket and said, no, this will not make me give up. The second bias was the crop was not important. So I would write a paper, I send, they say, no, this is not important. This is not a crop according to their publishers. But it's not important according to who? According to me as a person. I grew up eating these vegetables. According to me as a person, I've done work and I've confirmed these vegetables have high nutrient content. According to me as a scientist, I know these vegetables can make a difference, not just in Kenya, but in the world. So that is another issue that I experienced. Recently, in fact, as recent as 2018, 2019, I am a reviewer of an international journal, the international journal in quotes, the ones which are high impact. I review for them papers. So I submitted a paper, my own paper. The response came even before they even read or evaluated the paper. Also, the topic of your paper is not appropriate for our readership, whatever that means. So that also raised a lot of issues. If they are using me to evaluate their papers, how come my paper, which I've written, because I know their standards, I know the requirements, how come my paper is not good for the readership? Why? Because the paper was on African indigenous vegetables. Maybe they want papers in those crops that do well, or they are required in the global north. I don't know. That is my conclusion. I may be wrong also, because we are all listening. You can make your own conclusion. The other one is cost of publishing unaffordable. They tell you pay $3,000. That is more than even my own monthly salary. So that was already a bias against publishing in those journals that are regarded as high impact and international. The other challenge I had was accessibility to the papers that I published. I published some papers, the few that were accepted, I could not access the paper because it's hidden. So I asked myself, why would I publish in a paper, high impact journal, and people cannot access it? So actually at that point, I made up my mind, I'll just publish in open access or African journals that my work can be read. They may not be high impact in their definition, but to me, so long as they are accessible to people, they are high impact. So the other example I would like to share is I published a book. I had a project and there was a technical report which I converted into a book. So I gave to one publishing house in a global north. As I said, we're not naming names here. So when the book was ready, they asked me to buy 10 copies. There was no free copy. I had to buy 10 copies. And the book is not accessible to any other person. And it's on African indigenous vegetables. So that was a disappointment. So I said, in future, if I want to publish a book, I'll find for those people who can publish a book and make it accessible. And that's what I did thereafter. So this is a specific one which I experienced. And it was very disappointing because I wanted this book to go far and wide because it was looking at urban and peri-urban production of African indigenous vegetables in 2 cities in Kenya. And it was going to show the commercialization of these vegetables. Next, Sarah. So the other thing we have done is advocacy to promote these vegetables. Advocacy because I said I looked at the holistic approach. Apart from publishing, I needed everybody to know about these vegetables. So we had advocacy and outreach programs, capacity building, where I sit, the undergraduate and postgraduate students. We had to change the syllabus because even this global north syllabus, this global north influence, gatekeeping is also was affecting our programs, our academic programs. So all along, when I was in the university, there was no topic on African indigenous vegetables. When you go, just find also European vegetables or other vegetables except that one. So during that time, I had to influence the 2 universities where I worked to have it in the syllabus. As we speak now, we have even a full-time program, master program on African topic on African indigenous vegetables, so that if they are not in the syllabus, what are we talking about? Where does our research go? So that is also some of the things that we did. We worked with the farmers, with the community-based organizations, and policymakers. Now, policymakers, I want to just single out one, which we did in 2007. It was what we call African Indigenous Vegetables Policy Makers Dialogue. It was in South Africa, and we actually asked the representatives from the African governments to have this as an important crop in their Ministry of Agriculture. Of course, Kenya, when we came to Kenya, that changed the scenario completely. The research was now looking at all vegetables, including now it was included as African indigenous vegetables, which was not the case before. So this work actually has influenced policy in Kenya and beyond. Next. So in terms of dissemination communication, we have used posters, as you can see there, leaflets, simplified leaflets, books, documentary, and online platform. There's a lot of information on the online platforms. And out of this, I would like to say, you are from America. I was identified maybe through this online sharing of my work. I was identified by TED, and I gave a TED talk on African indigenous vegetables and fruits. If you search a TED talk by me, it's there. And I think all these things came because having open science, open publications, open publishing, and it makes an impact internationally and locally. Next, please. So I have been mentioning the benefits that accrues out of this, either open research or open publishing. I will not go word for word of what is here, but in short is that my satisfaction is or was that I can do work, I can share it, and people can use my work to change their lives, to change policy, to change the lifestyles, to change the nutrition status of people in Africa and beyond. And also, apart from helping me, which I also acknowledge, my own professional advancement came up because of sharing, because they say when you share, it comes back in a different way. That is what I believe. The world is full of sharing. We are born to share, but people have become selfish. They want to keep the knowledge for themselves. When you keep the knowledge under the table, it will not help you. It will not help anybody. So here is just a summary of what I have seen for me personally, for my university, and for other people. But last but not least, below there is recognition and awards. I have received awards sometimes. I don't know how they come, but because of sharing, because if I didn't share my work and what I've achieved, and especially so, not just by publishing in hidden journals, but publishing in open access journals, and also utilizing other communication channels to speak about my work so that everybody, regardless of where you come from or your level of education or level of understanding, you are accessible to my technologies I have developed on African indigenous vegetables. Next, please. So this is some of the summary of the recognitions that I've got because of this work. And some of these recognitions, sometimes people just see my work online and they just told me you have won some like, for example, the number 7 Edinburgh Medal in 2014, which I received for seat of medal Edinburgh. Nobody gave me forms to fill. In fact, I just received a letter that you had been nominated to be given this. So I thought it was a fraud. I said, no, we have seen your work online. And that's how I got that medal. So I'm saying this is not real, this is a real thing. So this open access, open science is a good thing, is a good place to go, not for other people, even for those people who are sharing. The latest one is just last year by the government of Kenya, the National Outstanding Research Award, NORA, which I received last year. And this is not because of anything, just because of the work I've done and I've shared, because they asked to give a portfolio, what you have done, how you have shared in open access, or how you have made an impact on the ground, how you have shared, how you promoted, and how you have made a difference in terms of changing policy and changing the lives of people. Next, please. So this work has not been without challenges. I've mentioned some of them, but in short, some of the major challenges that I've experienced is, of course, unwarranted biases from development partners, which I said it didn't stop me, but gave me another opportunity to look for other alternatives. We have issues of internet, ICT infrastructure not adequate in Kenya and other African countries. There is inadequate advocacy and misconceptions about some work. For example, in my case, when I was talking about indigenous vegetables, the global north thought I was working on weeds. I think a misconception and not understanding the real story behind some of the work we are doing within Africa and indigenous knowledge, which is very rich and needs to be exploited. Sometimes lack of awareness of publisher copyright and obligations. Some of the publishers, I think, like, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you give them work and then they own it, and then you who has done the work become like an orphan, and you cannot use your work to project and influence other people. And then the other issue I noticed when we were doing institutional repositories, harvesting research was a tedious process. I remember University of Nairobi, when I was promoting those repository, was not a very easy thing. So all these things come with challenges, but the sky is the limit, and I think we should never give up. I think open access, open science, open research is the way to go. Next, please. So in conclusion and some recommendation before I give you my way forward, deliberate efforts should be made and policies and strategy to put in place open access publishing so that people can access work regardless of where you come from or what you are working on, so long as that research has some impact, can have an impact in somebody's lives. Scientific research findings must be effectively communicated to the public. Now, the question that we've been discussing even when we're in Cape Town, what is really impact? When you have a journal that has a real impact, is it impacting the people? Is it impacting who? So for me, I looked at the impact broadly, because impact on the scientific community, impact on policy, impact on the lives of people and changing people's lives. So impact should be looked at broadly. As we look at science, as we look at publishing, we need to look at it in a broad sense. Researchers and scholars should make efforts to publish in open access journals. That I cannot say that enough. Develop enabling environment for open science, open research, open publishing for researchers. I think there should be incentives, there should be support. Identify African open science champions. And I just suggest you can use African Academy of Science, of which I'm a member, and also I am a governing council member. Clear reward systems be established. When you do a good thing, it's not the end game, but it's always good to be appreciated. Next, please. Now, what are my future plans? It's like I've done everything. I'm not there yet. As I speak now, I'm currently developing a concept note to establish an independent African Center for Excellence on African indigenous vegetables in rural Kenya. This will be an African center. What inspired me to do this was I had thought about it earlier and shelved it. But when I was in Cape Town, many people told me, you have so much on this. Why can't you set a center which can be one-stop shop? And I said, why not? Why I also did it, one time I had gone for an interview from the government of Kenya. They told me, you know so much about indigenous vegetables. Why don't you start a center? So I took it seriously, and I'm working on a concept. And what I have in mind is not a research center. It's just where you can get all the information there is on African indigenous vegetables. Although I've done all this work, there are some areas in the world that don't know what we have done, what's good about these vegetables, even within Africa. A center without borders, one-stop shop, and resource center on all aspects of African indigenous vegetables. Information on these vegetables for real impact could be accessed. This is to ensure the labor and gains we have made so far are not lost in oblivion. So you are welcome to join in to realize this dream. Is a dream, but I hope it will come true. Thank you for listening.
Mary, thank you so much for that incredible overview. I'm going to go back to your starting slide here. Wow. Yeah, that was such an incredible overview, so comprehensive. A couple things. So we're going to open to Q&A here in the time we have left.